Some crimes are so audacious, so brilliantly planned, they become the stuff of legend. We're talking about the heist of the century. But what's fascinating is how even the most perfect plan can completely fall apart because of one tiny mistake. Let's get into the story of the Great Train Robbery.
So picture this. It's 3 in the morning, deep in the English countryside. A Royal Mail train is barreling down the tracks from Glasgow to London. Suddenly, the driver, a guy named Jack Mills, spots something really weird. A red signal where it should be green. He hits the brakes, and the whole train grinds to a halt in the middle of absolute nowhere. Total silence. But that silence is about to be broken.
Now here's the thing, this wasn't just any old mail train. On board was a fortune. I mean, a truly mind-boggling amount of cash. So the big question is, how on earth did a gang of robbers know that this specific train on this specific night was carrying the payday of a lifetime?
Yeah, this was not a lucky guess. This was the result of a crazy amount of planning. And it was all fueled by some incredible insider knowledge. The gang's mastermind, Bruce Reynolds, had information that turned what should have been a wild fantasy into a very real and very profitable operation. And right at the heart of this whole thing is this mysterious figure we only know as the Insider. We're talking about a senior official, someone high up inside the Royal Mail who, for whatever reason, basically handed the keys to the kingdom over to the robbers. To this day, his identity is still one of Britain's biggest unsolved mysteries. So what did he tell them? Well, it was a 1-2 punch of pure gold. First, he told them that the special carriage holding all the cash, the HVP coach, was an old backup car. The new ones with all the alarms were out of service. This thing was a sitting duck. And second, get this. Because it was right after a long holiday weekend, the coach wasn't just carrying a lot of money. It was carrying nearly 10 times the usual amount. It was the perfect storm. Okay, so with this priceless info in hand, the gang was ready to go. On that morning of August 8th, all that planning was about to become action. And the execution was fast and brutal. Right after the train stopped for that fake signal, they cut the phone lines. The gang just swarmed the engine and overpowered the crew. The driver, Jack Mills, actually put up a fight, so they hit him over the head with an iron bar. Then they forced the injured Mills to drive the engine and the first 2 carriages just a little further down the track to a spot they'd picked out, Brightigo Bridge. Once they got to the bridge, the clock was on. The plan gave them exactly 15 minutes to unload everything. Can you imagine the pressure? It was a human chain of 15 guys just furiously throwing 120 mailbags weighing 2.5 tons from the train down the embankment to a truck waiting below. Just frantic. And this chart just shows you how incredibly efficient they were. They got almost all of it. Out of 128 bags of cash on that coach, they managed to grab 120 before their time was up. They had to leave the last 8 behind. But it didn't matter. They had their fortune. They had actually pulled it off. The crime was perfect. The getaways seemed flawless. They just melted into the night, heading for a secluded farmhouse they were using as a hideout. But as they were leaving the train, one of the gang members said something. Just one sentence. And that one sentence would end up sealing their fate. This was it. This was the fatal flaw. Don't move for 30 minutes. A simple warning to the postal workers they'd tied up, just to make sure they had a clean getaway. It must have seemed like nothing at the time, but this one little detail gave the police the first huge clue they desperately needed. So, why was that so important? Well, the police figured, hey, the gang must have a hideout that's within a 30-minute drive of the crime scene. That simple bit of logic instantly gave them a search area, a radius of about 50 kilometers. It took the hunt from, the entire country down to one very specific zone. The net was closing in fast, and the gang, who were listening to police radios from their hideout, they knew it. The very tool they were using to stay ahead of the cops was now the source of their own panic. So the original plan was to just lay low at this place called Leatherslade Farm for a few days, then quietly split up. But when they heard on the radio that the police were searching in a 50-kilometer radius, they freaked out. They decided to bolt 2 days early, and in their rush, they made another massive mistake. See, the gang had paid a guy to burn the farmhouse down after they left, but he just took the money and ran. So when the police raided the farm, they found a gold mine of evidence. But the smoking gun? You're not going to believe it. To celebrate, the gang had played a game of Monopoly, using the real stolen cash, and they left their fingerprints all over the board. Those fingerprints changed everything. Since most of the gang were already known criminals, their prints were on file. Scotland Yard started putting names to the prints, and one by one, the dominoes began to fall. And the police were relentless. Within just a few months, 14 of the 16 gang members were identified and arrested. But two key people just vanished. The guy they'd brought along to drive the train, who, funnily enough, couldn't figure out how to operate it, and, of course, the Royal Mail insider who made the whole thing possible. The sentences were incredibly harsh, 30 years apiece. The establishment was sending a message. But the real consequences went way beyond jail time. For the driver, Jack Mills, those 15 minutes at Brightergo Bridge cost him his life. He was so traumatized by the attack he never worked again, and he died just 7 years later. Meanwhile, the inside man just disappeared back into the shadows. His secret and his cut of the money totally safe.
The Great Train Robbery became this huge cultural moment. It literally changed how police investigations and cash transport were handled in Britain forever. The crime was solved, most of the men went to jail, but the architect of the entire thing, the one person who started it all, was never found. And so, after more than 60 years, that's the one question that still hangs over this whole incredible story. Who was the inside man?